I could make this pitch in 5, and I could make it in 30, but I can adjust it to 20. I'll make it 15, I think, and because unless I'm mistaken, both about the character of this great state and this great library and city, people come to events like this in the hope of being heard as well as of listening. And it's not a topic on which people are usually without an opinion. So let's agree, if we can, not to trespass too much on the public dimension of the soiree. The reasons for atheism, or as I would prefer to say, anti-theism, are, I would say, as follows. The first and the simplest objection to religious belief is that its metaphysical claims are not true, in fact are false, and come from a period that I would describe as the infancy, or the fearful childhood of our species, when, because we have brains that seek for information and seek for explanation, brains that even now prefer a conspiracy theory to no theory at all, and are bound to do so, and indeed in some ways a right to seek in this way, explanations had to be found for things that seemed at the time inexplicable. And in the absence of crucial information, we didn't know, we had no way to know that the Earth went around the sun. Didn't know that there was a germ theory that would explain disease. Didn't have any means of knowing that earthquakes were the result of living on the crust of a cooling planet in a rather odd solar system where most of the planets are either too hot or too cold to support life, and our own is in large part too hot or too cold to support it either, and where the remainder lives on a climatic knife edge and always has. Some design, by the way, and that's just of one solar system. We didn't know that matters of this kind, earthquakes, waves, disasters, were not punishments. It was quite possible to listen to those and even to believe those who thought that they could explain. But for these people, a double problem arises. There is first the difficulty of, if not the impossibility, of demonstrating the existence of any creator or designer at all. I think I say something uncontroversial when I say that no theologian has ever conclusively demonstrated that such a designer can or does or ever has existed. The most you can do, by way of the argument from design, is to infer him or her or it from an apparent harmony in the arrangements. And this was at a time when that was the very best that, so to speak, could be done. But religion goes a little further than this already rather impossible task and expects us to believe as follows: that the speaker not only can prove the existence of the said entity, but can claim to know this entity's mind. In fact, can claim to know it quite intimately, can claim to know his or her personal wishes, can in turn tell you what you may do in his name. A quite large arrogation of power, you will suddenly notice, is being granted to the speaker here. The speaker can tell you that he knows. He cannot tell you how, but he can tell you that he knows, for example, that heaven hates ham, that God doesn't want you to eat pork products. He can tell you that God has a very, very strong view about with whom you may have sexual relations, indeed, how you may have sexual relations with others. He can indicate, perhaps a little less convincingly, but no less firmly, that there are certain books or courses of study that you might want to avoid or treat with great suspicion. Now, this suggests to me already a design. I think I can see a design shaping up here, and I think I can see who designed it and created it. I think it was man-made. I think the whole inference, because you can certainly see a design at work, is that this is human, that it was designed at a time of great distress and great ignorance, and that it had an enormous advantage, the design of which can be inferred from every one of its practices. It gives to people, ministers, priests, rabbis, shamans, whoever's cell phone that is should know that we know where you live, by the way, and where your children go to school. It gives to those people power in the here and now, the only place where it really counts. If you are His Holiness the Pope and you have arrogated to yourself, for example, the power to bind and to loose and to decide who may read what and how many tithes must be paid, how many holy days must be observed, how many disciplines must be followed, are you seeking power in the hereafter, or are you seeking it now? It seems to me very obvious that, inescapable conclusion, that it's temporal power that's being talked about. And of a very dictatorial kind, I might add, an absolutist kind, a kind that is not open to the ordinary challenges. The divine right of kings was something you had to challenge not just at the risk of your life, which might end quickly, though the end itself would be slow and painful. The end would be final, but you were told you risked your immortal soul and the rest of your life too. That's quite a powerful instrument of secular discipline. And everyone can name their favorite example, I think, of how and where that kind of tyranny over the minds as well as the bodies of men was exerted. We think of it as belonging to our prehistory, but we only have to look as far as today's Iran, for example, to see a classic theocracy, a country from which I've recently returned, where I wondered how to convey sometimes the flavor of what theocracy really is like. Well, if you're a woman who gets in trouble with the regime and has committed a capital offense in Iran, but you're underage, you're a virgin, you may not be sentenced to death under the law of Iran, because the law forbids the execution of virgins. But you may be raped by the Revolutionary Guards so that you're no longer a virgin in the prison and then executed. I think that sort of conveys what people feel they're allowed to do when they think they have God on their side. And I could tell you far worse than that about what the arrogance of power is when it thinks it's backed by the divine. Well, this arrogation of power in the material world is really nothing compared to the dictatorship that is suggested by those who infer the whole celestial design that backs it. That's why I want to spend a moment or two telling you why I'm an anti-theist. You may be an atheist and wish that there was a God who loved you and took care of you. It's possible, but just to decide there isn't enough evidence for it, just as Mr. Jefferson was a deist, but didn't believe in religion. He didn't think God intervened. These positions are equally compatible. I know several atheists who would happily say that they wish it were true, but that they can't find that it is believable. My own view is that it's very fortunate for us that it isn't true, and I shall say why. If there was a supervising creator who took a personal interest in your life, what you would have from the moment of your conception, at least in one interpretation, would be a permanent, inescapable, unchangeable, unalterable, unchallengeable rule, which would involve round-the-clock surveillance and supervision of every single waking and sleeping moment of your life. The abolition of any privacy in your life or even in your mind and your most private thoughts. The most complete form of totalitarianism ever imagined. And indecent, too, when you think of how many private moments would have to be supervised in this way and invigilated permanently. And that would go on not just for the rest of your life, as it would if you lived in Iran. It would go on after you died. In fact, after you died, the real invigilation would begin. They'd only have started with you at the moment when you left this vale of tears. The two offers are, at that point, as you will know, at least from two of the leading monotheisms, either an eternity of praise and servility, everlasting praise and adoration of someone who has only done his job by creating you, hasn't been invited to do so, a proposition that sounded more like hell to me when I first heard about it, or a very much more unpleasant one, derived not from the Old Testament but from the New. There's no hell in the Old Testament. There's genocide, there's racism, there's slavery, there's child mutilation, there's everything else you could wish for, but there's no punishment of the dead. Not until the arrival of the gentle Nazarene is it suggested that for a crime you probably were forced to commit, because after all, you're created a sinner. You're created sick and commanded to be well, the essence of the totalitarian principle. But for that, you might face an eternity of torture, to which there will be no end. Now, I think this is a horrible proposition. I think those who wish for it are wishing for slavery and servility, for the abdication of their own responsibility, for the dissolution of their minds, the abolition of their individuality. I'm therefore very glad to say that there is no evidence for it at all. We can relax. I've been to all three axis of evil countries, actually, in the last 4 years, including North Korea. I'm the only writer who can claim to have done this, and Iraq. And it took me a long time, but now I do know what it would be like. What the question is, how to answer the question I had when I was little, what would it be like to have to praise someone all the time, from the moment you got up till the moment you lay down again. And that would be your only right and your only recreation, and it would be the only culture that you had, because in North Korea that's what you get to do. In North Korea you can praise the dear leader and you can praise the great leader. The great leader and the dear leader are in fact the same person. They're reincarnations of each other according to the dogma. The place is only one step short of a trinity. The dear leader, who we lampoon, the little dwarf, is only the head of the party and the army, not of the state. His father's head of the state. Father's dead now, has been dead for some years, but he's still the head of the state and will be forever. North Korea is therefore what one might call, I tried to call, a necrocracy, or a mausolocracy perhaps, or a thanatocracy. And you have the right only to praise and adore and thank for every single thing that you get. You owe thanks to these people. That's what it would feel like. The most unending pointlessness, the most unending nothingness, nullity, smashing of the personality, destruction of everything that counts as self-respect or dignity. But at least you can die and get out of North Korea. And you cannot do this with Abrahamic religion, which I therefore renounce as something essentially evil. Now, one consequence of its man-made character, and one way of demonstrating beyond very much doubt that it is man-made, is its proliferation. We have, I think, two choices here. Either man-made God or God-made man. If it's the former, nothing much remains to be explained. If it's God-made man, it's very hard to see why there are so many religions and why they're constantly at war with one another. Make the opposite assumption that man has invented religion and God, nothing is left to be explained. There is no mystery. There are, of course, innumerable proliferating cults, sects, confessional discrepancies, warring churches, schismatic groups. Most of the violence in Iraq, as we know, is not directed at our own brave soldiers and their allies among Iraqis, but at other Iraqis by other Muslims, who think it's cultural to blow up each other's mosques, something a secularist would never agree to do, to blow up, say, the Golden Dome at Samarra. We know from pre-monotheistic times, we know from Sophocles and Antigone, that any person of ordinary morality has a natural resistance to desecration, to profanity. We wouldn't do that. They would leave it to the religious to do it, which you always can. The last time American troops were needed in a context like this, it was because the Christians of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia were tearing each other's throats out, burning each other's churches, killing each other's children, all of it with a divine warrant, all of them, every last one of them, a faith-based. On that occasion, the Muslims were the most civilized people in the case. It doesn't make any difference. Almost everybody gets, as it were, their turn at bat to be the most intolerant among the religious. But to say that this is man-made, it seems to me to say something that's almost obvious. Now, I'm saying all this. Okay, I'm saying all this in the United States, where I must now say something I've been waiting for months to say, actually years to say, my fellow Americans. Thank you. I sometimes think you don't understand how lucky you are. Yours is the country that has the only constitution ever written that absolutely insists on the separation of these ideas from the state. When the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut wrote to Mr. Jefferson calling for a wall of separation, they were worried about what? Who did they think was going to persecute them? The Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut was the one they were afraid of. And rightly so, because the Congregationalists would have given them a really hard time if they'd been allowed to, if they could have seized any local power. This fighting, not just about religion, but between the religious, this desire to have the freedom not just of religion, but from religion, is enshrined in the founding documents of this country in a way that should make you very proud. And it should therefore put you very much on your guard that there are people who don't seem content with it, who seem always to wish to impose their own religious belief on this. To say, if only we could ban alcohol, as in the 20s, we'd have a more pure and perfect union. If only we could forbid the teaching of evolution, or get equal time for pseudoscience, like the alchemy class that follows the chemistry period in presumably these schools, or the astrology class that comes after the astronomy studies moment. Everything will be fine. Resist this with every fiber of your being. Join me, in fact, in my new favorite slogan. Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hitchens, thank you.
I would have thought it was too much to expect that this other speaker would have devoted all his remarks to me too. I mean, they don't exaggerate when they say Texas hospitality. It's very kind of him to make me his special subject, but let me try and take some of his points in order. First, a very small one, the Diane Sawyer point. I think she did say that when she saw the second plane go in, but I've seen the film, the only film there is, of the first plane going in. It's rather harder to see, and so you get the first words that are said in the post-9/11 era, or the immediate post-atrocity moment. And those words are spoken by a man on a big fire truck in New York, where the camera is mounted. And he says, can you guess? Yes, you can. Holy shit. And that was exactly a correct description of what was going on. Much more accurate than Diane Sawyer calling on God, which even I will do when I've run out of words, or above all, concepts. Yes, of course I'll say thank God. What else is there to say? I'll say it, as a, if you like, as a courtesy, but don't over-attribute it. Now, had I said that philanthropy was poison, or charity was poison, I think you would have probably had me over a barrel. I say in my book, I give quite a lot of time to it, actually. I have a moment in Africa, in northern Uganda, where I was recently. I don't just sit in northwest Washington, as it happens, where I was doing the following thing. I was seeing the progress of probably the most cruel and horrible war, not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world, since, I should think, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. I think it outpaces the Darfur War in its horror and cruelty, if not in its scale, for this reason. You've probably heard of the Lord's Resistance Army of northern Uganda, and of its terrible leader, Mr. Joseph Kony, who wants to impose the rule of the Ten Commandments on Uganda. He's a former altar boy, and whose army is made up of kidnapped children who are turned into zombies and sadists at a very young age and sent out to kidnap other children to replenish the ranks. And there's a real evil to this because, of course, even the Acholi tribe, the people who suffer most from this ghastliness, don't want very rigorous measures taken against this terrifying little army of children for fear that their own kidnapped children will be killed. So it's a sort of double indemnity. And it's enormously retarded the recovery of Uganda in the name of God. And though it's a Christian force, very explicitly so, its paymasters are actually the Sudanese murderers who've commissioned the genocide in Darfur, because they want a revenge on Uganda for Uganda's help for the South Sudanese Liberation Army. So it's all a wonderful faith-based nightmare down there. And I was sitting in a camp of where these children are gradually, some of them come in and give themselves up, some of them are captured, some of them get lost and are picked up. Terrifying children with guns and eyes of stone, who've learned so much about cruelty in such a short time that it shrivels your heart, being rehabilitated. And the people doing this were rather fundamentalist, but very decent Christian group. Can't remember exactly which, the World Forum something. And I was sitting with the man who ran it and said, well, I'd like to ask you a question. I said, as an unbeliever, which of you do you think is the most sincere Christian? I mean, here's Mr. Kony, who really goes out and fights like an Old Testament man and says he's going to impose the law of his tribe and his people and his teachings on everyone. And he wants the Ten Commandments and nothing else. And there's you. And you're doing what any secular group could do. I mean, Amnesty International could be doing what he was doing. I mean, not Amnesty International, in fact, but you know what I mean. Human Rights Watch, in fact, in Uganda is doing that and much more. And I know literally hundreds of secular missionaries and human rights workers who do what they do for its own sake, not to proselytize for a church or witness for a faith. Actually, to my surprise, the man took the question very seriously. He said, I often asked it myself. I don't know which of us is the real Christian. I have no means of knowing. Maybe it's Joseph Kony, maybe it's me. Well, you see, my case is the following. There really couldn't be another answer to that, because if you need a Christian or religious reason to do what you ought to be doing anyway for your fellow creatures, it seems to me at best superfluous, and at worst, perhaps slightly, just very slightly, I don't mean to denigrate anybody's humane work, slightly suspect. Why would you need an extra reason? Hope I'm making myself plain here. Why, could it be proselytization? It very often is. Could it be the feeling that you yourself will get an eternal reward for it? Well, you're supposed to. Secularists who undertake this kind of work can't be suspected of this kind of thing, nor of trying to win converts. It seems to me it's an optional belief. By all means have it. What you've said is being done by any of the people you've mentioned is being done by religious Jews on the West Bank, though they want to bring on the Messiah and Armageddon and bring about the end of the world, and by Muslim groups everywhere. In fact, Hamas it justifies its whole rule in Gaza, a disgusting dictatorship that it is, by its provision of social services to the poor, the needy, or as Mother Teresa would always put it, the poorest of the poor. That's exactly their justification. The same is true of Hezbollah in Lebanon. If you allow it once, you allow it for everybody. It isn't an argument. It's barely even an observation. And when I said about evangelicals, I meant to say, and I said about a very revealing film which you may have seen about Marjoe Gortner, the little boy who was put onto the preaching circuit by his parents. His name is an anagram of Mary and Joseph, and became one of the biggest tent draws around the country, a national superstar, while his life was ruined and exploited by these gruesome parents. And I don't know how it is then. There's a film made about it that everyone ought to see who's interested in this business. And if what I say is untrue about the racketeering nature of this business, why is it I only have to set my watch when I see someone like the Reverend Haggard, and I can tell you exactly when and how I'm going to see him in the news again? Why is it the case with these Chaucerian frauds, from Oral Roberts to, I can't remember, even their names give them away, onto the crack of doom, that it seems to be that it isn't actually Christianity that motivates it, but I don't blame Christianity for it either. Any more than many, many orphanages that have turned into rape rooms for clerics, with no child's behind left, as I like to phrase it. I don't say that's the fault of Christianity. I just say it proves to you that those who run orphanages say nothing and prove nothing about their religion. Now, to the point about Dr. Martin Luther King that you make, you skipped over the chapter I wrote about that too. If Dr. King, who was accused all his life and followed by the FBI on the proposition, you will remember, and denounced by its leader and by many others, for what he did in fact do, keeping company with secularists and socialists and leftists. You should remember this very well. We were all on the same side in those days. People like, not just people like Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, the great black secularist union and socialist organizers who actually organized the March on Washington, but people more to the left than that, people in the Communist Party who, to their credit, did a great deal of work for civil rights. What does that say, the bravery of the Communist Party in the South, about communism? Nothing. It doesn't alter the fact that communism is a religion of slavery, does it? And Dr. King didn't preach Exodus. He preached the metaphor of Exodus. He said, my people should be let go and allowed their place in a promised land. Exodus says, your people are allowed to kill anyone who stands in their way and enslave those who you don't kill, especially the virgins, for your own purposes, and take their land. And God's on your side doing that. We wouldn't be praising Dr. King if he had said that about Exodus. If he'd taken that as his text, we would be thinking of him as a delusional, racist demagogue, which is why it is such a good thing that Israeli archaeology, that is a pretty sophisticated group of people they are too at that school, which has tried its natural hardest. You can believe they've tried their best to find any evidence at all for the wandering in Sinai or for the Exodus or for the original Jewish presence in Egypt. Cannot find a single shard of it. It's entirely fabricated, and we should be grateful for that fact.
About a minute, Mr. Hitchens.
All right. Can I have two? Just because I want to do a riposte,
yes, of course.
And I want it to be ad hominem.
Absolutely. The ad hominem are the better.
Because I've also read some of Mr. Olasky's work. You may even remember my review of his book on presidential morality. It just expresses a worldview difference between us. I just feel one mustn't let that go. In writing about presidential morality, Dr. Olasky says that George Washington won the Revolutionary War because in the ranks of the Continental Army, cursing and drinking were forbidden, whereas in the ranks of the British Army, I've got to tell you, cussing and boozing was sort of rife. And I think your words, if I remember them correctly, I haven't had a chance to look them up, were godly policies brought forth victory. Now, here's the difference between us. I do not believe that God intervenes in human affairs. And I think it's rather profane. In fact, I think it's disgraceful to suggest that he does, especially when it's on your side. I will comment only that first, probably the Revolutionary War was won by the French Army and Navy, came in on our side at the crucial moment, in which I'm very sorry to say there was a good deal of boozing and expostulation. Second, Thomas Paine, certainly the most famous brandy drinker in American history, wrote the relevant documents that were read at Washington's order to the troops to stiffen the morale at Valley Forge, and carried a musket himself, soaked in the sauce as he was. Third, that my former fellow countryman, smashed as they were and full of rude words, still managed to hold on to Canada, India, most of Africa, Australia, New Zealand, still cursing and boozing away, and beat every other army put into the field against them for many years afterwards, from China to Peru. Be very careful when you talk about virtue, of whatever kind it is in the world, human virtue, precious enough as it is. Be very careful not to degrade such examples of virtue and courage as we have by associating them with the supernatural. They don't require this defense. They may well suffer from it, and they will make the speaker look foolish. Thank you. All right. Well, 98.9% of all the species that have ever been on Earth are extinct now. And whatever process it was that set this in motion or kept it going, the process of evolution and natural selection from which we have so self-evidently evolved, is a very pitiless one. It doesn't seem to be one that makes very many discriminations or chooses which species is to survive or which to be condemned. Stephen Jay Gould, in his wonderful book on the Burgess Shale, which I have an allusion or two, makes a very telling and I sometimes think chilling analogy. He says if you could put the tree, or he says more like a bush of evolution, of the paleontological remains that you find have gone off on a branch that ended up nowhere. It doesn't go up, in other words, in an ascent. It goes out, fans out in a long bush line. If you could, as it were, run all that back onto a tape, then play that tape again, there's absolutely no guarantee that it comes out the same way. Another branch could have thriven as ours might have withered. That's how random it is. Evolution doesn't know we're here. It didn't intend us to arrive here. It won't notice if we go. It will never know we were here. The stars look down, that's all they do. They don't care. As W.H. Auden says, a wonderful poem, in which the rather marvelous remark is made, if affections unequal be, let the more loving one be me, which Joseph Brodsky said could itself become the basis of a religion of love. Anyway, the poem begins by saying, looking up at the stars, I know quite well that for all they care, I can go to hell. Religion is a combination of debasement and servility. I'm returning to a point I made earlier, with a most extraordinary solipsism. I'll try and put that better. In return for your being told that you sinned before you were born, we had a quick refresher on that just now. You sinned, you committed crimes that are original to your species, for which you have no direct responsibility, but for which you cannot shake yourself. You're born guilty, created sick, commanded to be well, as Fulk Gravel puts it. And that in the Quran, you're told you're made out of a clot of blood by your creator. In the Bible, it's from the dust, and then women wrenched even from that rather muddy, imperfect creation as a lesser species. All this, and that you must go, as we all used to have to do, and confess your sins, say, mercy on me, a miserable sinner, wretched, guilty, unworthy. In return for that humiliation, in return for this total abolition of your self-respect, this conviction of having done wrong, you're told, but there's good news. The universe, the whole constellation, the whole celestial globe, the whole thing was designed with you in mind. So you can be, from someone totally abject and totally shamed, a complete solipsist, a raging egomaniac, the center of the universe, someone for whom it's all been planned. And not only that, but God has a plan for you too. And not only that, he was prepared to subject one of his children to revolting torture to prove his love. If you'd been present when that sacrifice, that human sacrifice was going on, you would have been in duty bound to try and stop it. But if you did, you wouldn't have been saved. If you'd done the moral thing and said, stop this now, I can't watch a human sacrifice, I can't watch someone being crucified. Stop it. No. You do that, you've missed your chance for salvation. This is madness. This is madness. And how many generations of humans went by not even knowing of this fantastic idea, dying in misery and ignorance and shame before it was suddenly decided, maybe I'll torture a son to death today and rescue the rest of them. Who can believe this? It's an insult, it seems to me, to self-respect in both ways. It hugely aggrandizes our importance in the scheme of things, and it greatly diminishes us as autonomous individuals. It belongs, as I say, to our childhood. Now, as for the Amalekites, listen. The firstborn of Egypt, every firstborn male child in Egypt has already been killed on a whim, just so these people can make their escape under cover of night. I don't remember whether it's said of the firstborn of Egypt that they were members of the Al-Qaeda organization or whatever fantastic allegation you made against the Amalekites, who are so thoroughly destroyed that we'll never know anything about them, like the Albigensians. We hardly know what the heresy was because of what a thorough job the Pope did. See how the Christians love each other, by the way, on these occasions. What did the firstborn of Egypt ever do to this loving God, that they should have their lives taken so his chosen people can run away? What's moral about believing this? What morally normal person will say they want the destruction of children for their redemption in Canaan? Professor Stephen Weinberg puts it quite well, I think. He says, in a morally normal universe situation, people of goodwill will do the best they can, and people of ill will, psychopathic types, wicked, evil types, will do the worst. They will do wicked things. If you want to get good people to do wicked things, you need religion. What do I mean by that? I mean to say that when they see a newborn baby arriving in their life, if anyone's ever thought, even myself, well, maybe there is something to this. Look at the perfection of this little bundle. Look at the little indentations, all of that, in the fingertips. The most, leathery old cynic like myself can have these feelings. We're not total strangers to the transcendent and the numinous, But they said, I tell you what, though, before we go any further, we need to get a sharp knife or a stone from somewhere and start hacking away at the genitalia of this little bundle. Because if we don't, we won't be doing God's will. Now, no moral person would do such a thing unless they thought it was divinely warranted. No moral person, I say, would show contempt and disgust about the female birth canal, as all religions invariably do, and about activities related to it, I may say, in both directions. Revulsion from it, disgust from it, scorn for it, and for all other forms of sexual congress. There seems to be a dread underlying all of this, a dread about the genitalia, a horror of women, a horror of their monthly effusions, a disgust, as I say, for their vaginas, that I don't find healthy. But that seems to me, in two senses, man-made. One, mammal-made, and two, made so that men can subordinate women, which seems to be a consistent finding in all religions. You will know that the pious Jew has to begin every day saying, God is to be thanked for not making me a woman or a Gentile. That's not moral preaching. No one goes around talking nonsense like that unless they think they have divine permission for it. Religion is therefore, yes, a poison, because it spoils even righteous acts. Now, I don't blame you for not reading all my book, and I certainly don't blame you for not quoting all of it. And by the way, we will just have to have a wager on what you said in yours, and I'll stand to my part of it. But I do spend a bit of time on this question of virtue. When a Muslim cab driver, who found a great deal of my money and my wife's money on the back seat of his taxi, and knew very well he could have kept it, we had no means of finding him, went to the trouble he did to bring it back and give it to us and say, well, that's his Muslim duty, wouldn't even accept when I tried to give him 10%, because I knew probably that would be an insult. Really, because it was his Muslim duty. First, I want to make 2 points. One is, I think that's trying to prove too much. I don't think it's at all to the credit of the Prophet Muhammad, or the Quran, or the Archangel Gabriel, who dictated the nonsense of the Quran to him, that this happens. I think the guy should have done what I would do. You find someone else's money, you take it back to him. If you want to be thought of as a moral person, you just do that. You've done the right thing, it's enough. What is this saying? It's a religious duty. It seems to me to pollute the integrity of the thing. The second is, if you use that to prove that Islam is a good influence, you'll have a lot of work still ahead of you. A great deal of work. All your work is still to come, as it is in your invocations of charity and philanthropy. You've proved absolutely nothing at all. You haven't even suggested a defense of religion as a moral or ethical thing. I think that's all I need to say for now.
Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Christopher, You referred to the Lord's Resistance Army as evil, which I completely agree, and it's a very sad state of affairs. But I was wondering, in your use of the word evil, are you using it as an adjective, or can you believe in evil but not believe in God?
No, I say in my book that I believe that evil is a real thing. I can't prove it, but there are quite a lot of things I can't prove that I couldn't be without. A lot of people jeer when you say evil, especially when the president says it. They say, oh, he's saying things are black and white when they're gray and so forth. You know how many liberals talk. If you put the word lesser in front of evil, you'll find every liberal's willing to use it. They do it every time at elections when they're considering who to vote for. I think that I've been to places where there's no other word for what I've seen. It's the surplus value of sadism and dictatorship and slavery and so on. It's the gratuitous bit on top, the bit that's just there for thrills and that would be done even if it didn't do the perpetrator any good. I mean, the self-destructive, nihilistic element. I can't put it any more strongly than this. And when you smell it, when you see it, you'll know. Hope you never do.
Agree?
I think I must have expressed myself very poorly in the first instance. When I said, but I seem to remember what I said, and I'll just have to submit myself to the arbitration of you, my peers. I believe I said that it would be possible to be an atheist and be sorry with your conclusion, that you could be an atheist who wishes that there was a God. Did I not say that? That I've met such people, but that I, to the contrary, am an anti-theist who is very relieved, given what the implications of divine rule would be, that there is no evidence for the proposition. Now, I hope that's plain now.
I'm wondering what the positive case was, that religion in general is false and Christianity in particular. So I thought maybe one of the arguments was this diversity of religious belief maybe gives you a reason to think that your religion is false or something.
Well, I say the diversity of religious belief is not mysterious if you assume that God is made by man. It's only mysterious if you think that man is made by God. Yeah. Like worrying about why tsunamis kill good people. This is not a problem if you think that we live on a cooling planet with a disturbed weather system. That just will happen, doesn't require any explanation. Nothing to pray over, nothing to why about. Nothing to have a sob fest on CNN about. This question answers itself. It's only a mystery if you don't know that we live on a planet with a cooling crust and a turbulent climate system, and you think, well, maybe God decides at what point weather takes people out. Occam's razor is the critical thing here. Dispose always of unnecessary assumptions. Does the plague break out because we've sinned, and if so, is it because of our divorce rate? Is it because there are too many homosexuals among it? Is it because the Jews have poisoned the wells again? Is it all this? Is it all that? That's what people used to have to ask themselves about, well into the 18th century, until they worked out about the germ theory of the disease. Then they had to encounter people like Dr. Timothy Dwight, the great divine of Yale, who said, well, inoculation would be even worse because it would be an intervention in God's design, which, presuming that God wanted to keep the germ theory of disease from us and have us dying and thinking that disease was a curse, would be true. It would be. Inoculation would be an interference with his design in that case. But this is the kind of mentality one's arguing against all the time. Currently, polio is spreading back across the world. We thought we had eradicated it. A lot of very good secular activists and medical physicians went out to do the eradication. I went with them as far as Bengal. Suddenly, religious people started to say, don't take your children in. This is a plot. God doesn't want you to do it. It only takes a few uninoculated children and the disease is spread all the way back across Africa now, thanks to faith and the faith-based. If you're going to take credit for all the charitable work, you have to take credit for all the atrocities as well, and it will leave you exactly where you began, with everything still to be explained.
On the right here, sir.
I have a question that's actually a two-sided question for each of the speakers, and the first would be for Mr. Hitchens. If we are to get rid of religion and religious teachings, what then do we base our morality on, our model for behaving well or doing good? And then the other side of the coin for Mr. Olasky is, it seems that your argument or your position precludes us having any morality or any good works to do without having religion to rely on to teach us those things. And was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about why it seems your argument or your position precludes that position.
Let me ask very quickly, Mr. Hitchens first, Dr. Olasky
Yes,
second.
I'll be terse, but thank you for asking, because I owe it as an answer to Dr. Olasky too. Morality comes from human beings. It's innate in us. We couldn't have got this far without it. Human solidarity requires it. Evolution necessitates it. The golden rule doesn't have to be taught to children. You may have to use a bit of squeeze every now and then to make them conform to it, but they know what it is. They understand it right away. I'll give an example very quickly from each of the two testaments. Do you really believe that the Jewish people got as far as Sinai under the impression that murder, theft, and perjury were okay? And only when they get there are told by God, actually, you've got to cut that shit out now. And those are the commandments in stone. Oh, up till then we thought that was cool. They would not have got as far as... Of course, the story, as I've told you, and as you can easily find by reading my book and others, the story is all bogus, but suppose it to be true, that's the contempt it has for human beings. That they wouldn't know unless told that murder, theft, perjury, to say nothing of adultery, can mess you up. Of course they know. Otherwise, we couldn't be having this discussion. We don't need religious permission to find these things out, or supernatural authority for them. Another example quickly from the Second Testament, the good man from Samaria, the man who puts himself out, goes out of his way to help a suffering fellow creature who's described to us by the alleged Jesus of Nazareth, quite clearly wasn't a Christian. He's doing something a while back that Jesus has got to hear about, is telling us about. He wasn't doing it because of Christian teaching, or as far as we know, for any religious teaching. He just saw another human in crisis and did what we all hope we would do, and some of us have sometimes done. Incidentally, if he was a religious Jew, as it's possible that he was, he would have had religious permission not to do that if it was a non-Jew on the other side of that road, because you don't have to help non-Jews, especially on the Lord's holy day, the Shabbat. You can leave them weltering in their own blood. In fact, you may be ordered to do so rather than break a commandment. So once again, only religion could make people act in a bad way in such a circumstance. Ordinary humanism is more than enough. All else is superfluous, explains nothing, and or leaves everything remaining to be explained. QED. Thank you.
Dr. Olasky, area of some common
Well, I'm no longer a Brit, and Mr. Galloway never was one. He's a renegade Scot. Of the most revolting dye. And to have a debate on the order of that, we would have to disappoint you, because Mr. Galloway is a thug and a liar and a demagogue and a man who has managed the odd feat of being able to be both a pimp for and a prostitute of Saddam Hussein. My opponent tonight, I need hardly add, is a great deal more elevated in every respect than that, so sorry to disappoint you. I regard the war in Iraq as part of the war against religion. The faith-based parties of God are trying to level Iraq to barbarism, and they're very nearly succeeding. As well as killing each other's children, their fellow Muslim children, which they don't scruple to do, they want to reduce by their religious precepts a once highly civilized and sophisticated society to the level of Somalia or Afghanistan, which is what happens, by the way, to any country when you try to run it out of a holy book. I think we should hereby highly resolve that no country of such importance and no people of such civilization who've been through so much and to whom we've promised so much shall ever be governed that way. We will not abandon them. The jihadists will never have Iraq. What we're doing there is one of the noblest undertakings the United States has ever made.
But as to the question, may I follow up just briefly? As to the question, though, isn't it odd to find yourself allied with perhaps the most religious, fundamentally religious administration the United States has had in recent memory, and with a fundamentalist and evangelical, or perhaps even a dominionist like Mr. Olasky?
The irony
He coined
is
the term
I see
compassionate
what you mean.
conservatism. We've seen how that's worked
I
out.
perfectly understand that. I mean, all my friends in Iraq, my Iraqi and Arab and Kurdish friends in Iraq are all secularists. For all I know, every member of the 82nd Airborne Division is a professional snake handler. But what they happen to be fighting for is a secular Iraq. So I would think the irony was at the expense of the religious rather than the secular.
Last question of the night, Senator Estes.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you for a tremendously stimulating debate. And Dr. Olasky, you've been a hero of mine for many years and part of what spurred me on to government service. But this is a question for the other side. And I was glad you talked about Occam's razor, but let's get to the end of our life individually. How do you answer Pascal's wager as far as, I've never heard an anti-theist, explain, maybe a short explanation of Pascal's wager.
Will be short.
Yeah.
But I can also say that, as well as at fine bookstores everywhere, my book, which you can get now, does have a discussion of this very question. So if I seem to stumble on by condensing it, you can get my more rounded view. Pascal's wager, in case it's not known to you, comes from Blaise Pascal, who addresses his pensée to the one who is so made as that they cannot believe. That's me. And he says, well, let me put it to you like this. What have you got to lose? If you bet God exists and loves you and you're wrong, you're no worse off than you were already. If you bet and you're right, there is no such thing. You're no worse off than you were already. If you're wrong and there is, you win, as long as you have said you agree with him. So why don't you do it now while there's still time? I have two comments on this. One, religious hucksterism of the cheapest, vulgarest, nastiest kind it's possible to imagine. He says, what do you got to lose? I've got a good offer for you. Come into my used car lot. Come on, baby, just lie a little, and you never know. No, don't talk to me like that, and don't call it piety when you do, or be prepared to have piety despised. Second, Bertrand Russell, when asked this question, said that if confronted with his maker, he would say, I used to be able to do his accent, oh Lord, you did not give us enough evidence. I would go a little further. I would say, well, look, boss, if it's true what they say about you, that you're an infinitely kind, forgiving, all-fatherly person, this is certainly what your fans keep saying, do you not have a little room in your, obviously very capacious heart for someone who just couldn't bring himself to believe in you and really, honestly, truly couldn't? As opposed to someone who won't spend half their life on their knees making fawning professions of faith because Pascal told them it was a good bet. Which of us is the more moral? Which of us is the more honest? Which of us is the more courageous? Which of us has the bluest eyes and is the most sexually attractive? Which of us has the real charisma here? I'm just only asking.
Well,
He's running away.
well, he isn't. He's not. He's walking away. We could have spent our evening doing something else. This was terrific. We were very lucky, and how lucky we are to be in a place where we can have this kind of open discussion. Christopher Hitchens, Dr. Olasky, thank you both very much.